For early access plus exclusive content, facilitated discussions, live one-on-one Q&As, and more, become a patron at patreon.com/BrucePointset. Welcome back to the Church of Can't Stop, Won't Stop. Bruce Pointset, and today I got a special guest with me. It's the pride of Bend, Oregon, Mr. Mosley Wotta, aka Jason Graham. How are you doing today?
I'm good. I'm great. I'm great. There's a lot in the great, so I'm feeling all of it right now. How about yourself?
Yes, sir. I'm doing good. You know, can't complain. So, you know, again, this series we're using "Can't Stop, Won't Stop: The History of the Hip Hop Generation" by Jeff Chang.
Yep.
As sort of this jump off point to talk about, you know, hip hop in Oregon and kind of just like the story here. So today we're talking about chapter 12, What We Got to Say, Black Suburbia, Segregation, and Utopia in the late 1980s. And I like to look at it as the Public Enemy chapter. Public Enemy being, you know, I'm just a big fan personally. But yeah, before we get into the chapter itself, I got to ask, are you a PE fan?
Yeah, I had, for better or for better, I had parents that were showing me stuff I don't know if I would show my kids at the age I was then. So I got introduced to Public Enemy because my parents were playing it in the house, but through Do the Right Thing.
Mm-hmm.
So I've always been a fan of it, but it was like through that, it was through seeing was it Rosie Perez dancing at the beginning of Do the Right Thing to Fight the Power. And I was like, what is that? Like, I'm like aroused on every level watching this intro. And and I've also been a fan of the kind of collaging that Public Enemy does through the technique of sampling and all that stuff in a way that's still, I don't know if they'll ever not be on the vanguard, on the cutting edge, just from like a production standpoint of what they were doing musically, you know. So yeah, big fan. But hip hop, it's so tricky to even say fan because you can go so deep on this stuff, and there's so many names and so many dates and so much intersectionality, or there's just all these different entry points. I always meet somebody who knows a lot more, and I meet somebody who knows a lot more than them. So it's like I'm like tentatively, can I even say I'm a fan if I don't know their entire catalog? So anyway, but yeah, fan of Public Enemy.
It's funny you say that about the catalog, because I think in a lot of cases, we have people we're definitely like I mess with, like I might know 3 albums by heart, and it's like if I've invested enough time to learn every word you said over the course of like 3-4 hours, I may not know 20 years in, I may not be up on all the new stuff, but I think that makes you a fan personally. Like I
love them.
Yeah, like I had this, when we think about even older catalog stuff though, like I don't know, I've become in more recent years like a real I guess disciple of There's a Poison Going On. Like, it's not It Takes a Nation or Fear of a Black Planet, but like when I listen to that album, I think about sort of the way like people talked about Jay-Z's 444, and it's like it's weird albums to kind of compare, but I would say like I see the through line is kind of like they both have this quote unquote grown man rap feel, where it's like it probably like it doesn't hit with people because like on the quote unquote like mainstream, through the mainstream filter, you're trying to reach like a teenage audience, but like what they're talking about in these albums, like if you hit a certain age, you get past like 30 something, it clicks in a different way, and it's just like music doesn't have to I don't know, it doesn't have to be kind of through this cookie cutter lens. Obviously, it's not going to sell what it's going to sell, but like, yeah, it's just I was listening to that album a little while back and just like, yeah, this makes so much, what Chuck's talking about makes so much more sense now that I'm like at this point in my life. It's just I would not have gotten this in college the same way.
Yeah. Well, and just on the commercial side of it, wondering about the mainstream. We treat the mainstream or reaching a certain commercial apex as a goal, and then I think about how that actually affects the communities that it is birthed from and is allegedly speaking to. I'm there with you in terms of the kind of maturing that happens as a fan of hip hop and appreciating the risk that artists take to continue to be honest to themselves. I just watched a clip of Andre 3000 talking about why he quit rapping, and he was focusing on the hip part of hip hop. And he was like, after a certain point, you get old and you're not hip anymore. And while I think I clearly understand what his point was, that it's a younger sound, all those things, and that once you get to a certain age or perspective or whatever, you need to age yourself out, like bow out gracefully. I thought this is a very damaging and or at least dangerous sentiment to put out there, especially for indie artists, like legitimately like independent artists who are doing it themselves, who can't stop the inspiration from coming through. This is one of the mediums or the medium that they convey their messaging. And would I want Mike Crenshaw to have stopped at 25? Like, like some of that stuff, it just kind of, I'm like, I hear what you're saying, but I think the answer is no. We've been so inundated with commercial expectation. The minute it gets coined, hip hop, and gets cobbled together and then packaged and sold, that's wrong. And I think it's fundamentally incorrect. I think we're going to see, we'll be seeing, like you have in jazz and you have in blues and you have in all classical forms, you have we're going to have 70-year-old rap artists, and we're going to have 70 and 80-year-old, we have 70 and 80-year-olds right now listening to hip hop, rap music, da 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 da. So that part needs to kind of scoot to the side. The kind of truth that was always in Public Enemy, even where you hear a blend of the so-called, to isolate sort of the youthful fervor, and then also maturity and the fearlessness that makes up some of the aesthetic of Public Enemy sound. You hear that in the State of the Union "Shut the Fuck Up" thing that they did, not just 2 years ago, I think, or year ago ish. I'm like, I love it, and I don't. It makes me nervous that folks get deterred by what they see when it's so clear that actually the mainstream is constantly trying to catch up to where the art's actually coming from. And so like, it's kind of the same thing with like, thinking that the people who represent you speak for you, that you didn't vote them in, kind of a thing. I'm like, no, we have the pushing power here. So let's not let them dictate. So anyway, just to go off on that for a second. And then, I really like being able to approach an album from a perspective that isn't about so much of like the material cachet. There's something more substantive, and I think that can get really like self-righteous, but this is why I love like Quantum Crew or whatever, which Jeff Chang springs out of. I love that there's so much of what they're doing is really speaking to something that's in my soul, not just like my pants and my pocketbook or whatever, so, and that's necessary. Like it's vital to not give that up. Would I want Rakim to not be out there? It just goes on and on and on. So,
yeah, and that's a perfect jumping off point to kind of like get into the chapter. Like literally the first sentence, is this quote talking about Def Jam as the quote ultimate suburban rap label, kind of like because of like Rick Rubin coming from pretty wealthy parents and being able to support Russell Simmons, Run DMC, kind of coming from homeowning, like Queens, LL Cool J too, Public Enemy.
Right. Homeowning Queens. I like how they put it like that. Yeah.
Public Enemy in Long Island. And I wanted to ask, you in particular, kind of like about that kind of I guess that description, that dichotomy, as someone who's, you've I mean, you've been around, you've lived
Mhm,
different places, you've kind of,
mhm,
like covered the spectrum as far as not just like performing, but also like facilitating conversations, like working with young people,
mhm.
using the music and whatnot. So yeah, I just want to get, when you hear that description is like the ultimate suburban label, what does it bring to your mind?
I think it does bring, like, immediately that Def Jam had good publicists. Like, that's what it brings to mind for me.
Mm,
Anytime we try to call an ultimate in hip hop, you kind of have to call bullshit. There are so many kings and queens, so much royalty coexisting in that you know theoretical throne at the same time or whatever. Um, yeah, I call bullshit at a time where like uh, Drake and Pusha T and Kanye are the best rappers of all time or whatever. I'm just like, but that's because I've spent so much time in Oregon or in like so-called underground scenes or whatever, where either actually it makes me think of somebody that I love that's from Portland, is Cloudy October.
mhm,
And one of the greats. Is he ever going to make that upper echelon stratosphere, da 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 da, without the backing of Clear Channel and all this stuff to push it up? Like, no, like is even that the goal of an artist like that? Like, I want an artist who's an artist. It's great if it has market appeal, but when I hear that, that hyperbole of this ultimate, the great or whatever, it sounds like it's a great label if you are a label and you want to sell shit, like if you want
mhm.
to sell stuff, that's a great way to be like, oh, you're number one. And then we've seen the effectiveness of that going forward, saying I'm the greatest of all time. I'm going to be the president, whatever it is. That power of belief can steer the thinkers, the populace, to think, wow, that person's so confident, that group is so confident, they must be. And then once you kind of give up thinking about it anymore, you're just in their camp, and then it's kind of done. But yeah, no, I don't think so. I was so curious, like, what the book doesn't cover is who are all the other unnamed groups that Def Jam actively either like acquired or crushed, pushed out, consciously or just as a byproduct of their growth. Um, those usually are the ultimate. Like, the best rapper is still living in some mom's basement just holding down a part-time job. Like, I'm convinced,
Mhm.
because that's what this stuff is. Like, um uh hip hop is underground. Like, underground hip hop, in my thinking, is a redundant statement. Like, it's all like there's no way to break away from that. And then, KRS-One goes into the whole, like, hip meaning trendy and hop meaning dance. Like, it's so much bigger than this and all that kind of stuff. So yeah, no, no. And that's not even getting into like the problematic stuff with like the people inside the company and how they were
Right.
treating other folks, right? Like, that's not even getting into that stuff. So it's just like, no, how could it be? That's the same argument as like, my prophet is better than your prophet, my deity is. I'm like, we're comparing infinities here. Is that what we're doing? Like, so good for them that it made that into the book. I mean, even that probably helped them sell however many more, but selling isn't the goal, So anyway,
Right, right. And it's funny, like, first up, so glad you brought up Cloudy. Like, shout out to Cloudy. Like,
dude.
it's when I think, because when I think about that, like you talk about as marketing, I think about it kind of like in two labels. On one hand, of course, just like the ever, you know, the ongoing need to kind of like put specifically like black or perceived to be black art in like
Hmm.
some kind of box to market it,
Right.
and what are the effects. And then on the more, because I think, yeah, later on, like there's a quote from Chuck D talking about, how in a way though, it did kind of like allow, I guess, this idea of like artists being able to kind of like talk about more kind of like quote unquote, like everyday kind of things. And even then, even
Yeah.
with Public Enemy, it was like it wasn't that simple, right? Like
Right.
like you're gonna get yours. Yeah, it's about on the surface it's a song about a car, but
Right.
it's very much a political, it's a
Mhm.
political message. And I think, even with someone like Cloudy, who's, talking, it's still got that like style, familiar style, like, braggadocio, but he's talking about, I wear children's clothes because I feel like it,
Right.
like
Right.
there's a filter, there's a, marketing team or someone who I could see like, if that were something he were interested in, like someone could jump all over that and make him a reality star, but he's just an artist. Like
Right.
it's just him,
Right.
so
Last time I think I talked, like, and this was years ago, I talked to him, and we were never super close. It was just, like sharing the stage at a show, and just admiring his stage presence, his full implementation of craft on all levels, like creating, like really making good raps, making good tracks, making good cover art. Like that. Did you ever see his driver's license? He had a driver's license download card that was so close to the original Oregon driver's license that they had to like go forth and like mess it up more, because it was the same thing like in that one thing, Exit Through the Gift Shop, where Banksy's talking about making these counterfeit bills that have Princess Diana on them or whatever, and they're so good people just thought it was actual money. So anyway, to be able to craft something that, he's like printing his own driver's license, but they're just download cards. Anyway, I would remember talking to him and being like, wow, this guy is well beyond where I was like, sort of what's next for you? And he's like, oh, I'm really getting into studying the stars. And then I ended up saying like, oh, like later in the conversation, I was like, yeah, and you're getting into astrology, right? And he was like, astronomy. I'm getting into astronomy. And I was like, oh my, like just the way he said it in that moment, I was like, how much permission do you have in your mind? I'm still scrambling to get over not upsetting my community. And you're just like, he felt free. And that's necessary if you're going to be making good art. And also the fact that I haven't kind of seen or heard from him, or like he's kind of hard to track down on Instagram. That's like for me, that's like another gold star. That's like much more of like, that's actually the ultimate track, to kind of like go where your inspiration and creativity takes you. So but definitely a fan of that guy's stuff, and definitely more interested in artists that reflect that kind of ethos, I guess. But you also said that thing about talking about everyday things, and there's something with the suburban, and I'm like in Sisters at the moment, but like Bend is kind of, there's all these towns that are kind of the additional suburbia to Portland. Mm-hmm. That there is a different kind of gravity or pressure that allows you to think about things differently, or it takes a little bit longer. So by the time it actually gets to you, it isn't as like to the heat of it. It's cooled down, or you saw it coming, or something that allows for a little bit more reflection to show up in the work that is created. And also so much just straight up copying and imitation that's seen as innovation in the communities that you're in. Like Bend, Oregon has been ripping off Portland for decades. But then I would say Bend rips off Portland rips off Brooklyn rips off Johannesburg. Like I always, I'm like, so but still, whatever. It is an interesting way to frame it. And I do like the fact that they didn't discredit or take away the authenticity that could come from a suburban experience, because there's also in like the MC battle and so much of the battling, there's also something that I've always been basically nervous about, squeamish about, is ultimate blackness, right? Which is also something that I just did not have available to me in Bend, Oregon, which is where I learned so much about that whole idea of like, oh, I might like this artist, but I can't, I'm not a true fan, because you'd have folks who just would fight so hard to understand all the science of Wu-Tang because they were so separated from, its origin point here in Bend, so, or systems. Yeah. Anyway,
Yeah, but kind of to that point with, Bend, earlier this year, you're part of an interview I did with a group, the Fathers Group, speaking of,
right.
Just like Black men kind of organizing together, and, can you just give for those who may not be familiar watching this, just like a kind of like quick overview of kind of like what the Fathers Group does, and then
Yeah, I mean, the Fathers Group is a community organization made up of, caring men who have come together to support Blackness in Central Oregon and the world and and be supportive of these next generations that are coming up, and also be a place where we can go and we can be with each other without necessarily having, not always having like an action item agenda. Like, I'm not participating in the day-to-day stuff with Fathers Group the way that I was at the beginning, just because there's like so much going on, and that has moved so quickly forward. I still get calls from folks from the group just checking in and maintaining that community, even though I'm not showing up to the meetings all the time. And the power of that is like, that's priceless. And I also appreciate some similarity to the formation of specifically Public Enemy with Fathers Group, where there is thankfully a little bit of thankfully the differences in diversity within that group creating pulls in different directions, which creates thankfully a kind of struggle of like, which way does this need to go now and which way does it need to go later. Similar, I was, as I'm reading about the origin of Public Enemy through Can't Stop Won't Stop, feeling that as well, where there was a general focus, and then like not really knowing how to include Flava Flav in the group, and like not necessarily knowing how to make, like, in what ways they wanted to engage with the marketplace or the mainstream and all those kind of things. Similar conversations there, but there was a baseline of fraternity and camaraderie that really was unshakable. And so yeah, like, and then just just to say, like, Fathers Group just recently, they did like like a backpack giveaway. I mean, it's like actively participating in the betterment of the community, and part of the byproduct of that is like I think just for the sort of scared so-called white community of like Black men can get together, and it doesn't immediately mean a plan for your downfall. But, or whatever they think goes on in those rooms, but yeah. So they're definitely, I'm glad you drew that point, because there was some similarities there. And again, we have folks who have a little bit of distance from the like immediate protests that are and were going on in Portland, and also folks who have been here long enough to see Ben change a few times, and then to realize, oh, we are participating in that change. Not only have we been the vanguard, but we actively can see and acknowledge that we are helping to push things forward towards figuring out how we're going to do all this stuff together. Really is ultimately like the goal, where we're like, oh, how. So I mean, it's still like every day it's still a revelation of like, oh, we have so much in common. Like, like, yeah, I know. Fascinating, And then the penalty of, if you have too much in common, then you're some subculture that's against, or whatever. You're all wearing white t-shirts. I know what that means, or whatever. So, like blah, blah, blah. So, yeah.
I think it's specifically like when we talk about like kind of like the parallels, because, in Can't Stop, Won't Stop, Jeff Chan kind of, writes about how, like Chuck D, Bill and Hank Stephanie, Harry Allen, they would just have, they just hang, like you kind of like said, like just meeting up with like no agenda, hanging out, having debates about, politics, apartheid to, the Mets or whatever it is, and just kind of like building that bond. And I thought it was kind of like, especially an interesting parallel to the Fathers Group, because I think, if I remember correctly, like some of the like origin story really does start with us, like some of you in the studio in Bend.
Oh yeah.
Can you just talk about that a little bit? Like,
like, well, just like specifically to shout out Day with Connecting the Streets and Connecting the Streets Entertainment, like the reality of, and this goes again to the innovation that's necessary for the independent artist, and the innovation that you don't even necessarily think of it as innovative or yourself as independent or any of those things at the time. You're just putting the pieces together to make it happen, so you can interact with these sounds that speak to you. The way that they talk about earlier on in the book with all of this being birthed out of DJs and rappers and MCs from Jamaica, and like thinking about Lee Scratch Perry and all these folks who just, it's not, and this is such like the true part of hip hop before hip hop gets branded as hip hop, is not needing the newest, shiniest, fanciest, whatever, just being able to like be like, oh, we have this space in our house. We're going to throw some foam up on the walls. We're going to get whatever microphone we can. And then when we need to upgrade, we will, or we'll just learn the gear so well that it's not going to matter. There was a thing with LP from All the Things, but like Run the Jewels is my favorite project that he's done. And they did some like thing where they had to challenge him with like grabbing random records and then making a beat kind of on the spot. But he was showing all his busted gear, right? He was just showing all his like busted gear. And that's not to say that that's what we're working with, but it's a metaphor for not needing to be like being able to create something, like build a studio in your garage, have gear that's good enough for you to put it out and cultivate a community and fan base around that kind of stuff. That just speaks to the ethos of hip hop of like, that's not a garbage can, we'll flip it over, we'll make it a drum or whatever. And so some of the stuff was just like sitting, like not even doing anything in the studio. It's just like going over to Day Day's house maybe and like just sitting in the studio for a second and talking. And again, like I haven't even felt like I've had permission to have enough time to do some of that. Like that's like a vacation to me at this point. Like I just want to go and hang out and just chill and not necessarily have to even do anything. And then maybe, through some inhalation therapy or whatever, we'll be inspired to put a track down. But that's like that artist Agnes Martin, who would just like sit until she was inspired and then she wouldn't do anything beyond the inspiration. And I see a lot of that in this community, and specifically like with stuff that like Day Day's doing, stuff that I'm doing, where it's like, well, we're really just gonna kind of steep ourselves in it, and we're literally gonna be like living in or with our studio, so it becomes kind of second nature. And then again, also too, we're not like some spring chickens who it's just all youthful and naive like fervor and just like we have real things that we're actually considering. So seeing the kind of work that comes out, either stuff that speaks to getting beyond that or even escaping that kind of stuff, or like completely ignoring it, or stuff that speaks directly to it, all of that is part of the mix here. So and it's great to know that like you can go to your boardroom meetings and have, with the city council and whatever, but that isn't more important or more effective than just kicking it in the studio for a while. Like that doesn't actually mean, just because you put on the suit and tie, blah, 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 that doesn't actually mean that's the more effective place to affect the culture and then therefore the community. It's just another place that you also need to show up and, articulate what your vision is for the community to come, and what the community is right now. So, yeah.
Yeah, that really just kind of speaks to just building authentic community. Like,
Yeah, right.
And kind of like, speaking of that interview from earlier this year, another thing you really say like lavish praise on, some of the other Fathers Group members, just about, the behind the scenes work, the stuff that, people don't necessarily like, it's not going to make, the front page of the news or, the top of the 10 o'clock news type stuff, but the stuff that makes, the substantive stuff, the emails, the meetings, all the like, just the stuff that's not so glorious, but makes this stuff work, that makes this sustainable.
Yeah.
And it really got me thinking about, this is part of this chapter, subsection, the new Vanguard. I'm just going to read that first paragraph of that. Where they say the key issue of the 80s was representation. The political radicals saw overwhelming whiteness in institutions of power and fought for multiculturalism and diversity. The cultural radicals saw an ocean of negative images and tried to reverse the tide with their own visions. And I'm not sure, I don't know about you, but when I read that, I can't help but think, this seems familiar. This seems like right now. I don't know. Like, do you get that?
There's so much of that, like there's let me speak for myself in that as well, and with love or whatever, but like how dare you suppose that you could speak for me better than I can speak for myself. You know, I think there's part of that in there as well.
Mm.
It's really a beautiful quote, actually. There's a lot of that, actually. I think in this book, just to zoom way out for a second, I think there's rhymes, and I think there's prose, and I think there's poetry that are just sort of hidden in all of this. There's some things where I'm like, he must have been aware that he made, I wish I had written some down to share, but I was like, he must have been aware that that was like a little rap, or that he's cleverly taking the history and then bringing it back as a metaphor, you know. There's some cool things in the book. But yeah, I don't see how it would be odd to feel as though, as ubiquitous as hip hop is, and the ubiquity of Blackness, how this culture couldn't be coming up, or in various iterations in the various, you know, groups that are coalescing right now. Like even if it isn't directly like, oh, we're some hip hop group that's a community organization or whatever, it's still in us. Like it's been in us it's in the water now for it to not have an effect on how we see things and how we move forward. I don't see it being separated out at this point. Like there's no putting the genie back in the bottle at all. Mm-hmm. Thankfully, like no hip hop is like extinction, you know. Like we just, and even actually, I don't even think that's true. I think from the Big Bang on, or whatever the, you know, starting point was, I think it's always been there. We named it and then we owned it at certain points. But yeah, it's and rebel, and then also gathering song. Like, yeah, I don't know. You cannot escape this. Like there's, you know, like just don't, just, you know, like you cannot escape it. Anyway, yeah.
And you know, when I read that passage, I hadn't really thought about this till we were talking just now. You know, there always feels like this kind of like allusion to this idea of, you know, remember this, you know, this time in the 80s. I mean, you're a bunch of rounds about like when everyone was wearing the medallions and everything and what happened, and, you know, and yeah, sometimes I wonder, like, is that, you know, is that not another kind of like false dichotomy of like, have things really like, have we really seen this like radical change, or is it just kind of been different, you know? Are we just living through different versions of the exact same thing over and over and over and over again?
Well, that's a specifically interesting question to ask right now, because right now we're like smashing against some ceiling where you can do some like Lindy Hop style, you can do some like 80s style, you can do some 90s style, you can do like, but we don't, the style right now is like the remake and the remix, kind of. Like we don't, I don't know, like the next breakthrough is going to be, you know, what, I don't know, AI doing its own fashion or whatever, or, you know, like AI walking around with no clothes, and then everybody's like, oh, that's the thing. Like, you know, like, I don't know what it's going to be. But it certainly is an interesting thing to think about, when I don't see as much invention as what happened with several generations within the first couple decades of like hip hop. You know, I don't see as much, and even then it was like repurposing stuff. So yeah, I'd have to give that a little bit more thought, but it definitely does seem to be something where folks are just trying. Well, he speaks to in the book, like talking about this whole, right at the beginning, the false idea of generations, of like, okay, let's just take this construct of time and then slice it into these chunks. Like, you know, how are you gonna do that? You're not really gonna do that. So it's convenient for things like journalism. It's convenient for things like documenting history, but it's way too slushy and too smeared for that.
Yeah, and you know, kind of that same passage, you know, Chang really talks about this idea of the return of the Black radicals, and obviously, you know, PE being the focal point of the chapter, but also, you know, references Boogie Down Productions, KRS-One.
Yeah, right.
And I was thinking, you know, because he has that rhyme about talking about, you know, 50 years down the line, you can start talking about, you know, who's old school. And it's like, if I just did the math on that, like maybe we've, you know, depending on when you date
Yeah,
the
where you got
beginning of
it.
hip hop, like
Yeah,
we may have just hit that point, you
right,
know,
right.
like it is interesting. I mean, kind of like bring it back to kind of where we started talking about just, you know, not letting age define who can be the artist or, you know, who's worthy of being an artist and listened to. Like
Yeah,
it is this, again, this interesting dichotomy of you know, what is quote unquote relevant, or what does relevant even mean? You
mm-hmm.
know, who gets to speak? What are we listening to, or what are we
Yeah,
missing, I should say, when we're just like, oh, you're not, again, you're not, you've crossed this arbitrary line of age that we don't apply to any other genre. So
right.
like
Well,
it's wild.
and then there's a couple things. I hope I can gather some of these different thoughts together. There's a couple things too where it's like you have to keep doing it because people are still catching up to your sound, even though the immediate community that you're participating in may say that you're behind the times or whatever. You know, and you saw that like with graffiti. So like graffiti's fading when it starts becoming popular in the eyes of the, you know, the Sotheby's and the whatever, like the art gallery world. Like it's, you know, it's like kind of folks are saying it's dead, or how they talk about so early in the book the death of hip hop, like so early, and that there's also a penalty that folks were saying things like, oh, their fan base was getting older and moving on to other things. You have to hold on to what you're doing for long enough to see that cycle come back around again, you know, and that there's going to be new folks coming, because it sounded to me like in the book there's like folks who are into Cool Herc or, you know, African Bambaataa or what have you, and then it started to fade, and then like those same, like then Bambaata's getting asked to come back and be part of the explosion of hip hop as sort of expensive, like affluent, I should say, affluent, like white America is starting to pay attention to it, and it's starting to go like the route of movies and the art galleries and all that stuff. So yeah, it's hard to say. Same thing with like you know, with breaking and stuff, where they're like, oh, that's old. And I do like the kind of constant, it's ocean like or it's sun like in this way, where there's just this constant like burning and turning, just this constant new wave, new wave, new wave, new wave. But the benefit of continuing to do, just speaking to the age and the artist who grows old, so-called older, but continues on through the years, you start to bring in some clarity and you start to hone your craft, and it starts to get kind of specific, and you have less options, like playing chess. Like after, you know, a couple moves on the board, there's only so many options that you have. Or in all the chess games that have ever been played, it's hard to innovate a brand new move. And I think fashion wise or culture wise, that's kind of where we're at. Like we've made so many moves at this point that it's hard to invent a brand new game. But that allows for an observations of patterns and cycles that we don't want to perpetuate to be highlighted and looked at, or rather than not perpetuating them, as the title of the book supposes, that it is something that continues forever, reallocating, repurposing, and finding the new ecosystems in which those things exist and work symbiotically. So that part is also really encouraging. But then I would say this, because I just turned 38, you know, so which is also weird, because in hip hop, as Questlove says, like hip hop is in dog years, you know, or whatever. But in Bend, the culture here is like 38 is like 25, you know, like this is like Neverland, you know, so people just want to be in this childlike state and just, you know, recreate all the time, and then like get high all the time and drink all the time and be caffeinated all the time. And it's like this escapist, denialist, like playground culture. Like I haven't always said, but I've said for a minute, like in Bend, we love our favorite subject is like like PE and recess and like, you know, maybe show and tell or something. But for the most part, nobody wants to take any of the other, nobody wants to take history, you know, like nobody wants to take any of the other classes, you know. So it makes it an interesting place to create from, because you have so much more time from the cultural perception of what is allowed as far as doing like youth stuff or whatever. But yeah, tangents abound. I don't know who's really even an authority on hip hop anymore beyond what somebody like a Jeff Chang can even do, where you can just like really accurately catalog and have all that data and be like a hip hop file. But I don't really know who's actually like in charge of it, because the people who are probably like really hardcore, the leaders of it, don't want to have anything to do with that. Like, it makes me think of that group Death Grips. I'm like, Death Grips is like, that's like, that for me was new. I was like, this is something new. This is something different. This is hip hop, but can you even call it that? You know, blah, blah, blah. But they don't want to have anything to do with like putting on that crown and being like, I'm in charge of what this sound is. And then you have folks who come in and they just rock the crown and then disappear for a minute, like Kendrick or somebody, where you're like, oh, this is the new Messiah. And then he's just ghosts, you know, and then you're like, okay. So I think that speaks to something that's more important, which is knowing that you want to interact externally with various communities, you want to participate in the times that you're living in, but the direction is in. It's an internal thing. And this is where the power of the heartbeat of hip hop is so poetically and like physically relevant. It is an inward thing. And that goes to the thing I was going to mention before with Father's Group, as well, as like, you can't literally see the heart, you know, but it is one of the most vital components that we have for the full body. And I feel like there's a lot of that going on right now. And then just to continue hogging this for a second, I'm curious what you think about, and not in a way to condemn, but just to like, or boost in terms of accolades, but I'm just curious how you view, how you feel, what your take is, what your vibe is on Win from Lake Oswego. So we've got like this just madhouse crushing lyricist who's, you know, a self-identified white lady.
Mm-hmm.
But she crushes the craft. She just knows how to rap good.
You know, funny story, I actually interviewed her also for this series. So yeah,
Awesome.
I'm a fan of what she does, just,
Yeah.
you know, general, but I think in kind of getting to know Win a little bit over, it's kind of like this last year, you know, I think one of the things that at least I've really appreciated beyond just like, you know, she does her thing musically, she does her thing on the mic. We all know that, but like the way she moves, I think is almost more of the story, because
right, okay,
you know, it's like when we talk about like Lake Oswego, it's a very well-earned reputation, and it's not just the white people. It's like, oh, like people look at us with skepticism, because over the years it's just like we've been on a weird, you know, just this weird exclusive, you know, like vibe. So being, you know, it's been important for people to be like extra conscious of that, and you know, even take that extra step of being like, you know, not like there's this notion, and it's kind of dissipated a little bit more in recent years, but you know, a lot of people like if they move out of LO, they will not tell you, and you gotta like pry them to be like, oh, you grew up in Lake Oswego at one time.
Right.
Like you don't want to be associated with it. You don't want to, you want to pretend like you're not that. So more in recent years, like people like Win, like my guy Troy, who runs Cultural Blends here in Portland, like people have really like, you know, not just like owned like, yeah, I'm from here, but also like I'm trying to create a different narrative. I actually, you know, like we're trying to like do a different thing. We're actually like collaborating with people. We're, you know, we own this sense of privilege we come in with, and we're going to use it to actually do something.
Yeah,
you know, something with it. So I've been really encouraged by that.
Yeah.
And, you know, it is this interesting thing though, where you have this person who, and I'm interested to see where it goes with Win specifically, because,
Yeah.
you know, like it's easy for, you know, like those of us who are like, you know, in the area, like, you know where it's one thing, but then once you go into that filter of like the national scene and people are just like, oh, it's another white person, they're going to hit you with an even harder level of skepticism.
Yeah.
And you got to like, there's this pressure to keep proving that you're a real human being,
Yeah.
you know, is
Yeah. Or that your origin point is valid.
right.
Which I appreciated again with Karis One when he came through town. He was like, it isn't going to be LA, or it isn't going to be Chicago. It isn't going to be these big spots. It's going to be the places that you don't expect it. And that's where it's going to come from. And that's very encouraging to hear, you know, outside of what is supposed to be the appropriate place to come from to participate in something like hip hop. So yeah, I think it's always probably going to be the case that it's bubbling where you don't, you know, the minute you put your finger, oh, it's here, then it's somewhere else. The unlikelihood of it being from the South Bronx, same as Lake Oswego, same as, you know, Central Oregon or whatever. There's a lot of it that's a very encouraging thing, and goes to the age, goes to whatever, you know, however you identify in terms of your gender, like all these kind of things, like whatever is the, because this is, again, this is such an underground well, it's underground, but such an underdog's story. So what all the things that work against you in terms of what the mainstream is projecting you're supposed to be are to your advantage if you can hold on to you what is authentically you. Like if you can actually hold on to that. Kate Tempest is somebody who, and that's not Kate Tempest is not the name anymore, but is an artist that has continued to look at like who they are, their love of hip hop, and owned who they are now, and who they and what that means. Really don't think hip hop has any geographical loyalty at all. Like, you know, like whatever the spirit
Right.
of hip hop is, I don't think so. Any more than you know, race, whatever. So, you know.
Yeah, I mean, I was kind of, you know, even if I think about, like we talked about at the beginning of the chapter, where we
Mm-hmm.
talk about Def Jam as the ultimate suburban label, but even, you know, I was growing up in like the, you know, in junior high in like the early 2000s and whatnot, the idea of, you know, that we would be here in 2021 and the biggest artist in the world is someone like Drake, you know,
Mm-hmm.
it, that would have been unfathomable to me. The fact that
Yeah.
like, you know, even like a year after like 50 Cent kind of like really, you know, like Get Rich or Die Trying came out, that Kanye would have been as big
Right.
and as accepted as he was.
Right.
It was, you know, the fact that like when Lupe came out on a skateboard, it was like, oh, that's gonna come back. Like,
Yeah.
it seems ridiculous to think that would have been unheard of back in the day, but like, really, you know, I
Yeah.
was here in Portland when, you know, like at the height of like people really, I don't want to say the height of people being into it, but like, you know, like at a time when like Mac Dre was like the biggest thing in the region, to tell me that, yeah, these same people, even just a year or two later, it's going to be all about Kanye.
Right.
You know, I've just let go of this idea, like you said, that there's anyone has any like geographic, you know, entitlement or whatever to the
Yeah.
culture. It's like, nah, this is whatever it wants to be, whoever, you know,
Yeah.
is out
Well,
there. Like, yeah.
It gets into an interesting conversation that maybe isn't one that we need to have right now, but it's definitely an interesting conversation about appropriation and first, right? There's a lot of first. We did it first, da 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 da. We did it first. Well, we do it better. Well, you wouldn't have better if you didn't have us doing it first, and all that kind of stuff. But it is an interesting. Humanity definitely, and right now we are learning how to navigate the waters of appropriation and inspiration. We're trying to figure that out constantly. And sometimes, in a sense, I kind of appreciate folks who like ruthlessly offend, who are provocative in that way, who are like, I'm not crediting anybody, I did this all myself, or whatever it is. Like, there's something slightly endearing about that, as damaging as it can be to the folks that aren't getting honored or getting compensated or acknowledged or incorporated into the new movement. There's something about that that also rings true for me, just because human beings didn't make up songs, for example. Like, like humanity thrived on like stealing from other folks, like that's what we've done. Like walking around in a bear skin, you're not a bear. Yeah, but I killed one and this makes me warm and da da da. But then we also see that level of assault where sometimes folks just jack something. And I do think the folks who do that more are the companies that aren't attached. Well, this is a convenient history that I'm saying. This might not be totally true, but it does exist, where there's a company that's like, oh, this is the trend. Well, we're just going to chop out these pieces and we're going to Frankenstein something together, and we're going to spit out a whatever, vanilla ice or something like that. Like, who cares? We're gonna just steal. That kind of ruthlessness does seem to have reek of like capitalism and things like that. But I needed to watch other people walk before I was going to do that. I needed to watch, there's some things that are more innate, but I needed to watch other folks do it and then learn how to copy that and then innovate my own style. But that's also how you develop your own style, So yeah, that's good. Did you talk with Wynn at all about this chapter in the book?
Oh, we did what chapter we did?
Chapter 12,
chapter
but
8. We did different chapters, so
okay.
It's kind of a bit of a different conversation, but
yeah.
Well,
and the other thing, hip hop continue to evolve, please other folks come in, like it hasn't been deeply problematic from the jump also too, like wasn't Public Enemy was like no facts, right? Like didn't they have that at one point, like this, like
probably,
I mean, I think I read, but certainly like Nation of Islam, like more stringent, like fundamentalist kind of whatever it is. The thing that's great about the so-called errors that we make, particularly with artists who continue forward, is that we get to learn and we get to watch them learn and grow as well. So that's a huge bet. Like, can you imagine if Trump came around and he was like, oh my gosh, I was wrong about so many things. Like, how amazing would that be? Could you imagine? But this is the realist in me, who is a dreamer, like, the pragmatist who thinks that possibility is a necessary practical function, because folks have these insights all the time, and those insights influence entire movements. So I'm excited to see what that is. And then one other thing I just want to touch on is really interesting, watching these various social movements addressing social disease, like a Black Lives Matter movement would be one of the more appropriate and timely things to talk about, and entities within that navigating or fully leading into the exploitation of the movement to like sell their album, that's just its own interesting thing. And then seeing how some of that has rippled and hit this rural suburbia or whatever we are here in Bend, rural, junior city, suburbia, whatever we are, where folks are commodifying the movement, and because they've been able to see it coming, so then they'll sort of package it and sell it. And that's an interesting thing too. But it's also can't totally condemn it, because it helps to carry it forward, and it gives us something to critically look at, to say we don't want to do it that way in the future. So yeah, tricky territories.
Yeah, it's wild, but yeah, I want to be respectful of your time.
I don't. That's the problem. I don't want to be respectful of my time or your time. I have no children at this moment. I'm sorry. Yeah.
Oh,
man,
yeah, but
I hope we got to talk about what you actually wanted to talk about. I hope we got to.
Oh yeah, absolutely. I was just going to say that when you talk about getting to watch these artists we grew up on, and learning in real time with them through their lessons. It reminded me, I'm not sure, do you watch Drink Champs at all?
Oh, I have watched that. Yeah, I have.
So yeah, do you see that? There was this clip going around recently because they had Trick Daddy on there.
Okay.
And I mean, on a lighter note of relearning, or not relearning, but learning lessons, because like Nori's asking about, if he gets his ass eaten, and Trick Daddy's out here talking about, yeah. And the Nori's like, well, but you're not out there, like, you're not out there with your legs up, are you? Like, it depends. This is just the funniest clip in the world, but like it's kind of like a microcosm of what you're talking about. Just like we're in a different, we're watching people grow in ways that are, some more serious, some that are just, it depends.
It depends. Yeah, exactly. Exactly, man. Yeah, it's not to be controlled, but you can enroll.
Right.
Yeah.
So yeah, Mosley, thank you again for
My pleasure.
taking the time. It feels like we could have this. This could have been like a 4-hour episode.
Yeah, no, it's fun to lean into that forever feeling of conversation, which I love. But it is also really great to say, like, it does go on forever, but this is the generation of time that we had together, and now it's closed, so it's good.
Awesome. Yeah. Thank you again, man.
Cool. Yeah, thank you. Keep doing good work, man. We need it.
Appreciate it.